Welcome back, everyone, to a new story. We really hope you enjoy it. Mr. Harrison, I need you to sit down. It seems we've been giving you the wrong medication. The words hung in the sterile air of the examination room, cleaner and colder than the disinfectant they used on the floors. Dr. Peterson, a man whose face I'd come to know over the last 2 months, looked pale, his usual calm demeanor replaced by a sheen of sweat on his brow. I just stood there for a moment, my hand still on the doorknob, the muted sounds of the Riverside Community Clinic bustling outside the door. My first thought wasn't anger or fear, it was oddly relief. It was an explanation. I sat, the paper on the examination table crinkled under my weight. The wrong medication, I repeated, my voice sounding distant, as if it belonged to someone else. For the allergy trial? What do you mean? He pushed his glasses up the bridge of his nose. Avoiding my eyes, he fiddled with a pen on his desk, clicking it open, clicking it shut. The clinical trial you enrolled in. There was a packaging mix-up at the pharmaceutical supplier, a catastrophic one. The bottles were identical. The lot numbers were sequential, but the contents were not. For the past 2 weeks, every morning at 8 a.m. with my coffee and toast, I had dutifully swallowed a small, chalky white pill. The ad had been simple enough. Participants needed for new generation allergy medication trial. Compensation provided. As a warehouse worker, my pay was steady but not extravagant. And the idea of getting a little extra cash for something as simple as taking a pill for my seasonal sniffles seemed like a no-brainer. The first week was unremarkable, but the second week, that's when things started to feel strange. It began with a tiredness that settled deep in my bones. A weariness that a full night's sleep couldn't touch. Lifting crates at the warehouse, a job I'd done for 6 years, suddenly felt like I was moving them through water. My muscles didn't have their usual tight, responsive spring. They felt softer. Then came the emotional swings. I nearly teared up at a commercial for a phone company. For God's sake, me, Matthew Harrison, a guy whose emotional range usually ran the gamut from fine to annoyed. I found myself getting irritated by small noises, yet oddly moved by the kindness of a stranger letting me merge into traffic. My moods were like a flickering light, unpredictable and confusing. The most unnerving changes, however, were physical. My skin, usually weathered and a little rough from my job, started to feel different. When I'd shower, my hands would glide over my arms and chest with a smoothness that wasn't there before. It felt sensitive, almost delicate. A brush of my t-shirt against my chest sent a strange, tingly sensation through me that was both irritating and something else I couldn't name. I started dismissing it all as side effects. Every drug has them. Right? The consent form I'd signed was a dozen pages of fine print listing everything from headaches to dizziness. I figured I was just one of the unlucky ones getting the weird stuff. Last Tuesday, I was standing in front of my bathroom mirror after my shower. I usually just glance, check for any stray hairs I missed while shaving, and move on. But that morning, I stopped. I really looked. My face seemed different. The sharp angles of my jaw appeared a little less defined. The set of my features somehow softer. My eyes, I thought, looked bigger. I leaned in, my breath fogging the glass. Was I losing weight in my face? Wasn't a dramatic transformation, not like in a movie. It was a collection of 1,000 tiny, almost imperceptible shifts that, when added together, made the man in the mirror feel like a stranger. A flicker of an idea, a terrifying and alien thought, had crossed my mind. I looked different, softer. I had shaken my head violently, splashed cold water on my face, and told myself I was just tired, just imagining things. Now, sitting in Dr. Peterson's office, the imaginary was becoming terrifyingly real. What was I taking? Doctor, I asked, my voice barely a whisper. The crinkling of the paper beneath me was the only other sound. He finally looked at me, his eyes filled with a mixture of professional regret and genuine pity. Mr. Harrison, he said, his voice heavy, you haven't been taking an antihistamine. You've been on a full-course, high-dose regimen of female hormones, estrogen, and an androgen blocker. The world didn't spin. I didn't yell. A strange, hollow calm washed over me. All the pieces clicked into place. The fatigue, the sensitive skin, the emotional roller coaster, the softness in my own reflection. It wasn't a side effect. It was the intended effect. My body hadn't been fighting an allergy. It had been undergoing a fundamental chemical rewrite, and I was the unwitting test subject. The relief I'd felt a moment ago curdled into something cold and heavy in the pit of my stomach. It was an explanation, yes, but it was an explanation for a nightmare I hadn't even known I was having. The days that followed my appointment with Dr. Peterson were a blur of confusion and heightened self-awareness. He had scheduled a dozen tests, apologized profusely, and talked about lawyers and compensation and corrective treatments. I nodded along, my mind a million miles away, trying to process the fact that my own body had become a foreign country. I stopped taking the pills, of course, but the instruction felt laughably late. The changes didn't just stop. If anything, without the daily dose of shock, I became more acutely aware of them. The most undeniable change was in my chest. What started as a vague sensitivity had blossomed into a distinct fullness. It was a dull, persistent ache, and the buds of my nipples were constantly hard and sensitive. Chafing against the rough cotton of my work shirts, I found myself instinctively crossing my arms over my chest, a defensive posture I'd never used before. One morning, I was pulling on a clean t-shirt, one of my usual plain gray ones, and it just felt wrong. It didn't hang right. It stretched in a way it never had before, creating a faint but visible outline of the puffiness underneath. Panic, cold and sharp, shot through me. I tore it off and rummaged through my closet for my loosest, baggiest hoodie, pulling it on despite the warm spring air. It became my new uniform. My entire physical presence in the world felt altered. My center of gravity seemed to have shifted. When I walked through the long concrete aisles of the warehouse, I was conscious of a new sway in my hips. It wasn't intentional, my body just moved differently now. My stride felt shorter, my balance a little more fluid. I tried to force myself to walk in my old way, with a heavier, more deliberate gait, but it felt awkward and forced, like acting in a play where I'd forgotten my lines. The familiar heft of my work boots felt alien. The changes weren't just about shape, they were about texture. The hair on my arms, once thick and dark, was now noticeably thinner, softer. My skin had taken on an almost translucent quality, and the veins on the back of my hands seemed less prominent. Shaving my face became a less frequent chore. The stubble that grew back was softer, patchier, and my voice? That was the most startling. I'd always had a low, gravelly voice, but now it seemed to get stuck in a higher register. I'd go to call out to my coworker, Dave, across the aisle, and what would come out was a thinner, softer sound that made him turn and look at me with a confused expression. I'd clear my throat, cough, and try again, forcing my voice down into a range that no longer felt natural. Internally, I was a wreck. My mind was a civil war. One part of me, the part that was Matthew Harrison, the warehouse guy, was screaming in terror. This was a biological violation, a chemical trespass that was stripping away my identity. I would look at my hands, turning them over and over, trying to see the hands that could lift a 50-pound crate without a problem. And instead, I'd see smoother skin, more slender fingers. I was horrified. I was being unmade. But then there was another part of me, a quieter, more insidious voice that whispered in the moments before sleep. It was a voice of pure, terrified curiosity. When I felt the softness of my own skin, there was a flicker of, not pleasure, not yet, but something that wasn't disgust. When I noticed the way my waist had begun to taper, creating a subtle curve where there had only been a straight line, a part of me felt a strange sense of aesthetic rightness. This was the part that made me feel truly insane. How could I not hate this? How could any part of me find anything in this nightmare that wasn't repulsive? One night, I stood in front of that same bathroom mirror, hoodie pulled off, my plain gray t-shirt clinging in all the new, wrong places. I saw the distinct swell of my chest, the gentle curve of my hips, the softening line of my jaw. Fear was still there, a cold knot in my gut. I was losing Matthew. Every day, a little more of him slipped away. But as I stared at the reflection, at this strange androgynous creature that was both me and not me, the quiet voice asked a question that terrified me more than anything else. If you could stop this, why is there a part of you that feels like you'd be losing something? I didn't have an answer. I just stood there, watching the person in the mirror, and for the first time, I felt a profound, heartbreaking sense of pity for us both. A week later, I was back in Dr. Peterson's office for a follow-up. The air was thick with unspoken apologies. He had a stack of lab results on his desk that he kept glancing at but not touching, as if they were radioactive. Your testosterone levels are, well, they're suppressed to negligible levels. Matthew, he started, stumbling over my name, and your estrogen is elevated to that of a female in her early 20s. The androgen blockers were extremely effective. We've effectively put your body through the first stage of a medically supervised gender transition. He kept talking, using clinical terms, mentioning specialists and potential counter-treatments. He spoke of suing the pharmaceutical company, of the clinic taking full financial responsibility for whatever I needed. He was trying to put a bandage on a wound he couldn't even comprehend. My body had been hijacked, my future rewritten without my consent, and he was talking about logistics. I listened to it all with that same unnerving calm that had settled over me during our first conversation. I should have been furious. I should have been screaming, throwing things, demanding someone's head on a platter. A part of me knew that was the normal reaction, the one Matthew Harrison would have had. But Matthew Harrison was becoming a ghost, a faint outline of the man I used to be, and the person sitting here in his place was just quiet, lost. Dr. Peterson finally ran out of medical jargon and legal platitudes. He sighed, taking off his glasses and rubbing the bridge of his nose. He looked exhausted. He looked at me, really looked at me, for the first time since I'd walked in. "Son, I am so sorry," he said, his voice stripped of its clinical authority, now just the voice of a man who had made a terrible mistake. "We can start a regimen of testosterone immediately. We can try to reverse some of this, some of the changes, the breast development, for instance. That may require surgery. It won't be easy, but we can try to get you back." Get you back. The phrase echoed in the silent room. Get me back to who I was. Back to the rough hands and the easy anger and the body that felt like a suit of armor I didn't know I was wearing until it started to soften. Back to the person who never looked in the mirror for more than a second, who never questioned, who just was. The idea should have been a lifeline, a promise of a return to normalcy. But it felt like a threat. The thought shocked me so much that I felt the breath catch in my throat. Reversing this, the idea didn't fill me with relief. It filled me with a sudden, inexplicable sense of panic, of loss. Losing what? This confusion, this fear, this strange, delicate body that I didn't ask for. Yes, all of that. But also the softness, the weird, emotional clarity, the feeling, however terrifying, that I was seeing myself for the first time. The silence stretched on. Dr. Peterson was waiting for my rage, for my demands. He was waiting for me to tell him yes, fix me, turn me back into the man I'm supposed to be. My voice, when it came out, was small. It was higher than it used to be, softer. It felt more honest than any sound I had ever made. I looked him straight in the eye. What if I started and had to swallow before I could continue? The question was a betrayal of everything I had ever been, and yet it was the most truthful thing I had ever thought. What if I don't want to go back? Dr. Peterson froze. His mouth opened slightly. The pen in his hand clattered onto the desk. He stared at me as if I'd just confessed to a crime. Maybe I had. The shock on his face was nothing compared to the shock inside me. I hadn't known I was going to say those words until they were already in the air, hanging between us like a verdict. In that moment, the fear that had been my constant companion for weeks began to change. It didn't disappear, but it was joined by something else, something powerful and new, a terrifying, exhilarating curiosity, the concept of gender identity, something I'd only ever heard about in passing on the news, was no longer an abstract political debate. It was the frantic, desperate beating of my own heart. The accident had thrown me off a cliff. For the first time, instead of just screaming, I was starting to wonder if I might be able to fly. The doctor, to his credit, recovered quickly. He looked at me with a new kind of expression, not pity, but a deep professional concern. "Matthew," he said gently, "this is a lot to process. The hormonal changes can have profound psychological effects. Before we talk about any medical path forward, I think it would be a good idea for you to talk to a specialist, a psychologist who deals with situations like this." I nodded numbly. He was right. I wasn't just dealing with a medical mistake anymore. I was standing at a crossroads I never knew existed, and I had no idea which way to turn. I left the clinic that day with a referral in my pocket and a storm in my head. Sleep offered no escape. My nights were a restless tangle of sheets and fragmented dreams where I was running from something I couldn't see. It was during one of those long, silent nights, with the blue light of my alarm clock showing 3:17 a.m., that I found myself sitting at my small kitchen table, my laptop open in front of me. I don't know what prompted it. It wasn't a conscious decision. It was more like a magnetic pull, an impulse I was too tired to fight. My fingers hovered over the keyboard, and then, slowly, I typed women's clothes into a search bar. The screen filled with images of models in bright dresses and stylish outfits. It felt alien, like looking at artifacts from a different planet. I clicked away, my heart pounding with a mixture of shame and something else. Excitement. I felt like a spy, an intruder in a world where I didn't belong. I refined my search: simple black dress, women's cotton underwear, soft cup bra. The words themselves felt illicit on my tongue, even though I was only typing them. I found a large, anonymous online retailer. No one would know. No one had to see. I clicked on a plain, A-line black dress made of a soft jersey material. It was modest, with short sleeves and a hem that fell just below the knee. It looked comfortable for my measurements. I used a tape measure I found in a junk drawer, my hands fumbling and clumsy as I measured my chest, my waist, my hips. The numbers on the screen seemed to confirm a new reality. My waist was 2 inches smaller than it had been a month ago. My hips were wider. These were just facts, numbers on a chart. With a trembling finger, I added the dress to my cart, then a pack of simple, cotton bikini-cut underwear, and finally, after minutes of staring at the screen, a soft wireless bra, the kind meant for comfort, not support or cleavage. It looked gentle. I paid with my credit card, requested the plainest brown box shipping they offered, and shut the laptop with a snap, my breath coming in ragged gasps. I felt sick with guilt, but also alive with a terrifying, electric thrill. The box arrived 3 days later. It sat on my doorstep like an unexploded bomb. I scurried out, grabbed it, and brought it inside, my eyes darting around to make sure none of my neighbors were watching. I took it to my bedroom and locked the door, my heart hammering against my ribs. I slit the tape with a key, my hands shaking. Inside, wrapped in crinkly plastic, were the items I had ordered. They looked so small, so impossibly delicate. I took out the underwear first. It was just white cotton, plain and simple, but the feel of the soft, stretchy fabric in my rough hands was a revelation. It was so different from the thick, utilitarian material of my men's boxers. The decision to put them on felt like stepping off a ledge. I stripped off my own clothes, my body feeling clumsy and oversized in the quiet room. I stepped into the panties and pulled them up. The sensation was immediate and overwhelming. It wasn't sexual. It wasn't arousing in the way I'd always understood arousal. It was a feeling of correctness. The way the soft fabric hugged the new curve of my hips, the way it settled against my skin, it was a gentle, private embrace. It felt right, deeply, shockingly right. Next was the bra. I fumbled with the clasp at the back, my fingers unable to perform the simple task. Frustrated, I clasped it in the front and spun it around, pulling the straps over my shoulders as I'd seen in movies. The soft cup settled over my swollen, sensitive chest. It didn't pinch or bind. Instead, the gentle pressure was a relief, a comfort. It felt like a shield. Finally, the dress. I pulled the black jersey material over my head. It slid down my body, the fabric cool and smooth against my skin. It didn't cling awkwardly or pull in the wrong places. It just draped. It fell from my shoulders, skimmed past my newly defined waist, and swirled gently around my knees. I stood there for a long moment with my eyes closed, just feeling the whisper of the skirt against my legs, the secure feeling of the bra, the soft hug of the cotton panties. My heart was still beating fast, but it wasn't from fear anymore. It was from discovery. Slowly, I opened my eyes and looked at my reflection in the full-length mirror on my closet door. The person looking back at me was a stranger A soft, strange person in a simple black dress. My shoulders were still broad. My arms still had a memory of muscle. But they were framed differently now. The dress gave me a shape, a silhouette that was utterly new. My face, with its softer lines, seemed to fit the image in a way it hadn't before. I didn't smile. I didn't feel embarrassed or ashamed. I felt a profound sense of quiet. I reached up and touched my reflection's face, my fingers tracing the line of this new jaw, this softer cheek. And I whispered to the person in the mirror, the sound barely audible in the silent room. I feel okay. The psychologist Dr. Peterson had referred me to was named Dr. Amanda Chen. Her office wasn't clinical or cold like the clinic. It was warm, filled with soft chairs, shelves of books, and a large window that looked out onto a small, tranquil garden. Dr. Chen herself was a calm, gentle woman in her 50s with kind eyes that seemed to see more than I was comfortable with. I spent the first 2 sessions just talking, clumsily trying to explain the unexplainable. I told her about the medical mix-up, the physical changes, the constant state of confusion I lived in. I told her about the baggy hoodies and the fear, and then, hesitantly, my voice dropping to a near whisper, I told her about the black dress. I expected judgment, or at least a clinical analysis of my symptoms. Instead, she just nodded. And how did wearing it make you feel, Matthew, she asked, her tone even and completely devoid of surprise. It felt, I struggled for the word, it felt quiet, like all the noise in my head stopped for a minute. It felt, all right, the admission hung in the air, a fragile confession. Dr. Chen didn't push, she didn't label, she just created a space where I could lay out all the contradictory pieces of my life without fear. We talked about my childhood, about my job, about the things I used to think I wanted. We explored the idea of Matthew, who he was, what he represented. He was a construct of expectations, a role I had played without ever realizing I was on a stage. During our 4th session, she leaned forward slightly, her expression thoughtful. I want to try something, if you're open to it, she said. It's just an exercise. Identities are complex, sometimes. The names we are given are like containers that become too small for us. If you were to give a name to this new set of feelings, this person you saw in the mirror, what would it be? I stared at her. A name. It had never occurred to me. The person in the mirror was just me. A version of me that was confusing and new. To name it felt like making it real, like giving it power. My mind went blank. I had no idea. I don't know. That's all right, she said gently. There's no pressure. Just let the idea sit with you. The idea didn't just sit, it took root. For the next week, it was all I could think about. I'd be stocking shelves at the warehouse, my mind a million miles away, turning over names. Jessica, Sarah, Emily. They all felt like costumes, like names belonging to other people. Nothing fit. The answer came from a surprising place. I was at a laundromat, waiting for my clothes to dry, idly flipping through a worn-out paperback someone had left behind. It was a historical novel, and one of the characters was a woman described as quiet but resilient, a woman who endured hardship with a sort of graceful strength. Her name was Justine. Justine. The name settled in my mind not with a clang, but with a soft click, like a key turning in a lock I didn't know was there. It felt elegant but strong, taut but not weak. It felt right. At my next session with Dr. Chen, my hands were sweating. I felt absurdly nervous, like I was about to give a presentation. She opened with her usual calm greeting. "How have things been, Matthew?" I took a deep breath. "You asked me about a name." She waited, her gaze patient and encouraging. "Justine," I said. The name felt strange and foreign on my lips, but also wonderfully, terrifyingly correct. Dr. Chen smiled, a small, genuine smile. "Justine," she repeated, testing the sound of it in the room. "That's a beautiful name. How does it feel to hear it spoken out loud?" I hadn't been prepared for the wave of emotion that hit me. Hearing her say it, so calmly and naturally, was like a physical release. I felt the tension in my shoulders, a knot I didn't even know I was carrying, begin to loosen. I could breathe a little deeper. I didn't have to fight so hard. "It feels lighter," I admitted, my voice thick. "Good," she said softly. Well then, Justine, let's talk. And just like that, something fundamental shifted, for the first time. I wasn't just a medical anomaly named Matthew Harrison who was experiencing strange side effects. I was perhaps someone else entirely, someone with a name, someone named Justine. And as I began to talk to Dr. Chen, for the first time, it felt like I was the one who was truly speaking. The name was a key, and it unlocked a door I had been too afraid to even touch. With Dr. Chen's guidance, I started to explore what being Justine meant, not just inside the safe confines of her office, but in the world. It began with small, secret steps. I started wearing women's underwear under my work clothes every day. It was a hidden secret, a silent affirmation against my skin that only I knew about. It made the baggy, masculine uniform of the warehouse feel more like a costume than my reality. My online shopping became more frequent. I bought a few simple, androgynous pieces, first women's jeans that were cut to fit my new hips, soft, scoop-neck t-shirts instead of crew necks. Each new item felt like reclaiming a piece of myself. The first time I went out really out as Justine was on a Tuesday evening. It took me 2 hours to get ready. My hands were shaking so hard I could barely apply the tinted moisturizer I'd bought, a product the young woman at the drugstore had patiently helped me pick out. I didn't know anything about makeup, but I learned from online tutorials, aiming not for glamour, but for subtlety, just enough to even out my skin tone, a bit of tinted balm on my lips to give them some color. I chose my outfit carefully, a long, flowing navy blue skirt that swished around my ankles, a simple cream-colored blouse, and a long gray cardigan that felt like a protective blanket. I slipped my feet into a pair of simple flat shoes. Looking in the mirror, I saw a woman who was tall, nervous, and trying very hard not to be noticed, but it was, unmistakably, a woman. My plan was simple: go to a bookstore 20 minutes away, in a town where no one knew me, buy a book, come home. The 5-minute walk from my apartment to my car felt like a marathon. Every sound, every distant car door, every rustle of leaves made me jump. I felt exposed, a fraud waiting to be discovered. Inside the bookstore, the scent of paper and coffee was calming. I kept my head down, my eyes fixed on the spines of books, my body rigid with tension. I was so focused on trying to act natural that I felt like a malfunctioning robot. I found a book I wanted and made my way to the checkout counter. My heart was pounding in my ears. As I approached, a man who was leaving the store reached the door just before me. He stopped, pulled it open, and held it, looking at me with a polite smile. "After you, ma'am," he said. The word hit me like a gentle shockwave. Ma'am, he saw a woman. He didn't see Matthew Harrison in a skirt. He just saw a woman. My breath hitched. I managed a small, shaky smile and a quiet, "Thank you," my voice coming out higher than I intended. I paid for my book, my hands trembling as I handed the money to the cashier, a young woman who didn't give me a second glance. I walked out of the store, the little bell above the door chiming my departure. Back in my car, I sat in the driver's seat for a full 10 minutes, the book sitting forgotten on the passenger seat. I hadn't been laughed at. No one had pointed or stared. I had been met with casual courtesy, normalcy. The man holding the door hadn't done it because he was attracted to me. He'd done it because it was a polite gesture offered to a woman. And in that simple, mundane act, I felt a sense of validation that was so powerful it brought tears to my eyes. The initial fear and awkwardness I'd felt walking into the store was slowly being replaced by a fragile, budding sense of excitement. It wasn't the thrill of deception or disguise. It was the profound, exhilarating feeling of being seen, truly seen, for the person I was starting to believe I was. It wasn't about the world's attention, it was about the world's recognition. That simple ma'am from a stranger was more affirming than anything I had ever experienced. I wasn't a medical accident anymore. I was a person moving through the world, and for the first time, the world was seeing me correctly. The small victory at the bookstore was a turning point. It shifted my journey from something that was happening to me into something I was actively choosing. The changes in my body were no longer just symptoms of a medical error. They were becoming a part of my authentic self. This realization led me to my next, most crucial step. I needed to take control of my own transition. Dr. Chen referred me to an endocrinologist, Dr. Martinez, Walking into her office was a completely different experience from my meetings with Dr. Peterson. I wasn't a victim of a mistake here. I was a patient seeking care. I introduced myself as Justine, and she used the name and correct pronouns from the very start, without hesitation. She reviewed my convoluted medical history, her expression a mixture of professional focus and sympathy. "Well, Justine," she said, setting the file aside, "it seems you've had a rather unconventional start to your journey. My goal, should you choose to continue, is to make sure we do this safely and sustainably. We'll monitor your hormone levels, adjust dosages, and ensure your body is handling everything correctly. This will no longer be an accident. It will be your decision, under proper medical supervision." The relief was immense. We discussed the effects of hormone replacement therapy (HRT) in detail, the permanent changes like breast growth, and the ones that would require ongoing treatment to maintain, like skin softness and fat redistribution. We talked about risks and timelines. For the first time, this process felt demystified. It wasn't some strange alchemy happening in the dark. It was a science, a medical path that others had walked before. I left her office that day with a legitimate prescription in my hand, filled out to Justine Harrison. Seeing that name on a medical document was another quiet, powerful affirmation. That evening, I held the small estrogen patch in my hand. It was different from the chalky white pills I had swallowed in ignorance. This was a choice. With a steady hand, I applied the patch to my skin. It was a simple anticlimactic action, but it felt like signing a declaration of independence. With the medical side of my life now intentional and secure, the rest of my world began to align. What had started as cross-dressing in the privacy of my room was now simply getting dressed. My wardrobe underwent a slow and deliberate evolution. I donated my old male clothes, bag by baggy bag, until my closet was filled with soft blouses, comfortable A-line skirts, well-fitting jeans, and simple dresses. I learned what colors suited my paler complexion and what styles flattered my new shape. It wasn't about being fashionable. It was about feeling comfortable and confident in my own skin. My movements became more natural. I no longer had to consciously think about how I was walking or sitting. My body, guided by its new hormonal reality, settled into its own grace. The slight sway in my hips was no longer something to be fought against. It was just the way I moved. My voice was another area of practice. I worked with a speech therapist Dr. Chen recommended. It wasn't about creating a fake, high-pitched voice. It was about finding my natural female resonance, learning to speak from my chest in a different way, and adjusting my inflection and patterns, slowly. The voice that had felt forced and thin became my own. I would read books aloud to myself in the evenings, and for the first time, the voice I heard sounded like the person I saw in the mirror. It sounded like Justine. Every part of my life, from the clothes I wore to the way I spoke, was no longer an act of imitation. It was an act of becoming. For months, my life had been compartmentalized. There was Justine, who existed in the safety of my apartment, in Dr. Chen's office, and on anonymous trips to bookstores in other towns. And there was Matt, the increasingly quiet and withdrawn warehouse worker who hid inside baggy hoodies and mumbled as little as possible. The divide was becoming unsustainable. The effort of code switching, of packing Justine away every morning before work, was exhausting. If I was going to truly live, I couldn't live in pieces. The day I decided to go to work as Justine was the most terrifying day of my life. I had already spoken with my supervisor and an HR representative. They had been surprisingly, if clinically, supportive. Policies were quoted. Pamphlets on workplace diversity were referenced. They agreed to send out a memo informing my coworkers of my name and pronoun change. It was all very professional, very procedural, but it did nothing to prepare me for the reality of walking into that warehouse. I chose my outfit with the care of a soldier preparing for battle simple. Dark wash women's jeans, a plain maroon long-sleeve top, and my comfortable flat shoes. My hair, which I'd been letting grow, was pulled back in a simple, neat ponytail. I wore minimal makeup, just enough to feel put together. When I walked through the employee entrance, a sudden silence fell over the break room. It was like a sound vacuum. Conversation stopped mid-sentence. People who I had worked alongside for years, people I'd shared jokes and complaints with, stared at me. Their faces were a mixture of shock, confusion, and in a few cases, open-mouthed disbelief. I could feel their eyes on me, scanning my body, my face, my clothes. It was 100 times more intense than the walk to my car on the night I went to the bookstore. This wasn't a world of strangers. This was my world. I kept my head held high, my heart hammering against my ribs, and walked toward my locker. I could hear the whispers starting up behind me, a low buzz of my old name mixed with hushed, incredulous questions. Every step was an agony of self-consciousness. The day was a blur of sidelong glances and awkward, forced interactions. Some people avoided me entirely, their eyes darting away whenever I came near. Others seemed to watch me with a sort of morbid curiosity, but there were small moments of grace. Dave, the guy I used to call out to across the aisle, approached me by the loading bay. He looked nervous, but his eyes were kind. "Hey," he started, then corrected himself. "Justine, the memo? Yeah, so, you good?" "I'm good, Dave," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "All right, cool," he said with a nod, then turned back to his work. It was a simple, clumsy exchange, but it was an acknowledgement. It was acceptance. It meant the world to me. My supervisor made a point of calling me Justine in a loud, clear voice when he was giving out assignments. A woman from the shipping department, Maria, gave me a small, encouraging smile when we passed in the hallway. These small gestures were life rafts in a sea of awkwardness. As the weeks went by, the novelty began to wear off. The stares became less frequent, the whispers quieter. I was still a topic of gossip, I was sure, but I was also just becoming a part of the daily landscape again. I did my job, I worked hard and slowly. People started to see the worker, not just the change. It was during this time that I realized something profound. When I was Matthew, hiding my confusion, I walked with my shoulders slumped, my eyes down, trying to be invisible. Now, as Justine, facing the judgment and curiosity of my entire workplace, I walked with my back straight. I looked people in the eye. I was terrified. Yes, but I was also, for the first time, completely and utterly myself. I wasn't apologizing for my existence anymore. I was no longer hiding. In the place where I should have felt weakest and most exposed, I found a strength I never knew I possessed. I stood straighter as Justine than I ever had as Matthew. Life settled into a new rhythm. I had my work, my therapy sessions, my quiet evenings at home. I was building a life, not just an identity, yet. There was a loneliness to it, a private space that felt vast and empty. I had never considered dating as Justine. The idea was fraught with fear and complications. Who would want to navigate my past? Who could see me for who I was, without the footnote of who I used to be? I met David at a small independent coffee shop I'd started frequenting on Saturday mornings. It was one of my safe spaces, a place where I could read for hours, unbothered. I'd noticed him before. He was a regular, too. He had kind, crinkly eyes, a calm demeanor, and a dusting of gray in his brown hair. He was usually engrossed in a book or his laptop. One Saturday, we both reached for the last available power outlet at the same time. Our hands brushed. "Oh, sorry," I said, pulling my hand back quickly. No, my fault," he said, his voice warm. "You take it. My battery can hold out for a while longer," he smiled, and the kindness in his eyes from across the room was even more apparent up close. "Are you sure?" "Positive," he said. "I'm David, by the way." "Justine," I replied, the name feeling more natural on my tongue than ever before. That was it. That's how it started. We started exchanging small smiles across the room on subsequent Saturdays. Then, brief conversations while waiting for our coffee. He was a graphic designer. He told me. He liked old movies and hiking. He asked me about the books I was reading. He never asked probing questions. He just seemed genuinely interested in my thoughts. The first time he asked me out, it was so casual I almost missed it. I was thinking of seeing that new indie film at the Avalon tonight. He said, "I don't suppose you'd want to come with?" Panic and excitement warred in my stomach. This was it, the moment where things could become real and complicated. I knew, before I could let this go any further, I had to tell him. We sat at a small table, our coffees growing cold. I took a deep, shaky breath. "David," There's something you should know about me." He listened patiently, his gaze never leaving my face as I stumbled through a condensed, terrifyingly vulnerable version of my story. I told him about the medical accident, the discovery, the choice I'd made to live as Justine. I braced myself for the flicker of disgust, the polite but hasty retreat. When I finished, the silence was deafening. He just looked at me for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then, he reached across the table and gently placed his hand over mine. His touch was warm and firm. "Thank you for telling me," he said, his voice soft. "That must have been incredibly difficult. And for what it's worth, Justine, I'm glad I got to meet you." There was no but, there was no hesitation, just acceptance. The tears I'd been holding back welled in my eyes. Our date that night wasn't a whirlwind of romance. It was something better. It was comfortable, it was easy, during the movie, in the dark of the theater. His arm brushed against mine, and a simple, electric warmth spread through me. After, as we walked down the street, he gently took my hand, his fingers interlaced with mine. It wasn't a possessive grab. It was a quiet offering of connection, the simple act of holding his hand, of feeling the strength and warmth of his palm against mine, made my entire body tremble slightly. It was an intimacy that was completely new to me, not about passion or lust, but about safety. This wasn't a fiery, all-consuming love affair. It was something quieter, gentler, and far more profound. It was the feeling of being with someone who saw all of me, the complicated past and the hopeful present, and chose to be there, in David's presence. I wasn't a project or a curiosity. I was just Justine. And for the first time in my life, I felt not just accepted, but chosen, loved. This morning, the sun is streaming through my bedroom window, casting long, golden stripes across the floor. I'm standing in front of my closet, a steaming mug of coffee on my dresser, deciding what to wear for a Saturday brunch with David. The closet itself is a testament to the journey. Gone are the shapeless hoodies and bulky work shirts. In their place are soft fabrics, gentle colors, clothes that feel like an extension of me. I choose a simple, floral print sundress as I slip it on. The fabric feels cool and light against my skin. It's a familiar, comforting sensation now. I turn to the full-length mirror, the same one where I once stared in horror at a stranger's body, the same one where I first whispered my new name into the silence. The woman who looks back at me today is no longer a stranger. Her face is soft, her eyes clear, her shoulders, while still broad, are carried with a grace I never thought possible. Her hair falls in soft waves around her face. There are still traces of the old me there, the height, the bone structure, but they are the foundation, not the whole building. They are parts of a history, not the definition of a present. I'm not looking for Matthew anymore. I don't analyze my reflection, searching for the ghost of the man I used to be. I don't wonder what he would think, or what might have been. The what-ifs have faded, replaced by the simple, peaceful reality of what is. The person in the mirror is just me, Justine. A small smile touches my lips. I think about the sterile clinic, about Dr. Peterson's pale, worried face, about the chalky white pill that I once thought was for allergies. It was a catalyst, a violent shove onto a path I never would have had the courage to find on my own. But it wasn't magic. It didn't create someone new out of thin air. I lean closer to the mirror, looking into my own eyes, and a final quiet thought settles in my mind with absolute clarity. The accident didn't turn me into someone else. It just broke the shell I had been wearing my entire life.